Space means if you put all scenarios together, you created the force impression to people. They start to believe these would happen together. Okay? So when they respond to disasters, they will put every station in the hot zone. Right? They even put the press conference area in the hot zone because during the disaster exercise, you show them that everything should happen, within the vision of the stage. Right? So it's a space mistake, time mistake, right? Because we put everything together, so it's one after another, which means you need to complete the high-rise building, urban search and rescue, then you can start to triage your impact people. Is that true? No, because many times they happen parallel, right? And sometimes they have the consequence. If you didn't do a good job in the urban search and rescue, if you are too slow, right, then in your triage area, everybody got a black ticket. You do not need to transport them to hospital because you need to transport them to the morgue. Understand? So because of this way of prepare for disasters, we train our responders in the ways they never understand what is the truth of disaster response. Because every time, every young firefighters, every young emergency managers join this type of exercise, they can only see, hey, there is a time and a space limits for disaster response. So this is the next limitation. Okay, and I think the very serious problem for this type of exercise is it limits your imagination. So think about if disaster happened from the 0 to your XL, right? So I pick 3 time spot, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? So in every minute, the 5 minutes, you should have 5 options. In the 10 minutes, you have another 5 options. In the 15 minutes, another 5 options. In the traditional ways of organizing the disaster exercise, someone would tell you what to do, again, linked to my previous point, right? If you always handle with a small-scale emergencies, the only thing is you arrive at the exercise and ask people, what should I do, right? So the traditional ways of organizing the exercise will tell you, okay, just follow this way to complete this task, right? So they select the option for you. To the certain points, right? Disaster response should be 5 cubed, right? If I only pick the 3 spots on the timeline, but you limit the possibilities to only 1, right? So which means every time you organize this kind of exercise, you lose 124 possibilities. So disaster responders were trained to limit their ideas. They could not think about the 5A, 5C, 5D, 5E, because every time you exercise in this way, right? So every time the older, the senior emergency managers will lose the imaginations, will lose the abilities to think outside of the box, right? Because limit the selections. Okay, so the key is to keep thinking or allow people to think about other possibilities. If I can organize this exercise again, I will firstly ask people to think about, in this moment, the 5 minutes, is there other things we can do? We can discuss more, right? So that's why in the Homeland Security HSAP guideline asking you to have the discussion-based exercise first. Then we have the operation-based exercise. That's the reason. Because if you go directly to operation-based exercise, you lose the possibilities, the possible ways to solve the problem. Okay? The NASA try to have a pen, create a pen that can be written in the space. But the problem is in the space, there is no gravity, right? So which means the ink is very hard to use in the space. So the NASA think this can be a problem. So NASA post in the internet, say, can everybody solve the problem, right? Can everybody create a pen we can use in the space? So someone outside of the USA, have you ever tried a pencil? Understand? Right? So many times because we are in the rabbit hole. So we cannot think about one simple answer for that. Understand? So even the participants are from the different field. Someone is from the factory or pencil factory. He or she can solve the problem for NASA. Right? Good? Okay, so we keep talking about the gap. Good? This is a missile. So in one exercise, the city mayor asked all emergency managers if a missile strike the high-rise building in the big city, how can we do that? Right? When I update the HSAP for the Office of Homeland Security in Taiwan, last year, the office director asked me, hey, Ray, have you ever think about the wartime scenarios? Look at what happened in the Ukraine, right? Do you think we need to include some wartime scenarios into our, exercise evaluation program? I say, yes, we should. We should. But the fundamental thing is everything developed from small to big, right? Like Hurricane Katrina. Even Hurricane Katrina, before it landed to the United States, you have 2 to 3 days, right, to do the evacuation, to have the public warnings, to prepare for something, right? Even we say the FEMA might not do very well for that, but before Hurricane Katrina, FEMA had started to transport the waters, food to the neighboring states, right? Which means in American emergency management field, we say every disaster, all disasters are local. So it starts from small to big. To answer the previous 2 questions is first, we need to think about the whole time frame, right? Before the missile actually hit the high-rise building, how much time we have. If we have that much time, what are the things we can do? And after the missile hit the high-rise building, how much time we have, right? What are the things we can do? So I normally communicate with my students or with other emergency managers is we need to look at the emergency management as a bigger picture. It's not just one moment, okay? A lot of people, when they are planning for disasters, they will think about the one moment of a disaster. For example, if I ask you to plan for something like a September 11 New York City evacuation, mass evacuation in New York City, everybody would think about one moment, right, when everybody was there. But if you read some researchers talk about the process, right, everything starts from very slow, right? You have a couple people start to take the ferry, then you have a lot of people together in the ferry, right? So during this process, the response organization will be very unstable because it's expanding or shrinking, right? So the point is not to argue the system is rigid or flexible, right? For some of you read the ICS research or discussion, is researchers think ICS should be like this, right? And someone especially focus on small-scale emergencies, which is nothing wrong. Say ICS is actually this, right? So they can only think black or white, but actually they didn't realize it's a process, right? We need to realize the processes from rigid to a very flexible situation. Okay, follow me? Okay, so this concept can conclude in the concept of agility and the discipline. So again, I'm not the first one to talk about this theory. So this is a citation here from Professor Hero. He was a previous director of the Center for Crisis Management in George Washington University. He said we need to think disaster response as a spectrum, right? So it swings from rigid to flexible, right? Not only ICS, not only other topics, even in the disaster planning, we need to, yes, follow the regulations, but sometimes we need to allow people to, based on the scenarios, situations, to have some flexibilities, right? We need to handle the processes from rigid to flexible, not to just write down the SOPs, ask everybody to follow the SOPs to complete the disaster, to conduct the disaster response activities. Okay, so this is another gap. Okay, the next jump to what to plan for emergencies. So fire-centric emergency planning, right? Again, there's nothing wrong with that. I was a fire officer. I was in charge of planning for emergencies in my field, right? So in that time when I planned for the long tunnels, I came up with the critical scenarios. I think, okay, there are two critical scenarios. One is fire inside the tunnel, or another one is a hazmat accident, right? A trunk with chemical materials might, have car accident there, then create fire, right? Everything linked to fire. So it's fire-centric. So my focus will be focused on the fire and how to prepare for fire, right? So this is a fire-centric view of that. We'll focus heavily on response and prepare for response, right? So I worked with my previous co-worker in Oklahoma State University. We analyzed the major textbooks in fire service administration and the emergency management. Then we realized that if a fire officer wants to become an emergency manager, again, there's nothing wrong with that, nothing good or bad. He or she can take more courses in the disaster mitigation and the recovery. Okay, that's based on the content analysis. Okay, good. So what to plan for emergencies. So based on the research, yes, we need to realize, again, the nature of disaster response. We need to realize there is something we can plan before disasters. There is something we need to improvise during disasters, right? So researchers, Dr. Quarantelli, actually the previous director of Disaster Research Center in the University of Delaware, told us in the year of 1997, there are two demands during disaster response. The first one is called agent-generated demand. For example, in order to respond to the floods, you might need sandbags, right? To conduct the heavy search and rescue activities, you might need bulldozers, right? This is called agent-generated demand. It really depends on what's going on, right? So you cannot prepare in advance. But there is another type of demand, it's called response-generated demand, which means you need to establish a response system like ICS, which means mass evacuation, no matter what type of disasters, you need to do this, which means you need to transport your citizens, the impacted people, injury to the hospital, right? So this response-generated demand you can prepare in advance because no matter what type of disasters, you still need to do the same thing, right? So right now, when I give suggestions to the private company, so start from 2020, I work with a private company in Taiwan, try to help them to establish the company-wide disaster response system. So in the preparedness parts, I told them you need to exercise those functions of disaster response, not the scenarios of disaster response. Let me say again, you need to exercise those functions which are universal to different disasters, but not scenarios, right? So a good example for those functions or response-generated demands are the ESFs, emergency supported functions, right? So I took a picture here, right? There are firefighting, emergency medical services, urban search and rescues, transportation, communication, right? So if we can organize our disaster exercise in this one, no matter what kind of disasters, our responders can respond to that, right? Because they have the fundamental abilities, capabilities. They are not driven by the scenarios, because if they are driven by scenarios, if the scenario changes a little bit, they don't know how to do. But if they have the basic fundamental capabilities, no matter what kind of disaster, they still can respond to that because they still need to do these 15 or 16 ESFs in different types of disasters. Okay? Good. So this is called all-hazards approach, actually. Okay? So finally, we go to who should be included in disaster planning. Again, when I was a fire officer, I utilized my firefighting ideas to organize the exercise, right? So I set up the scenarios in that time and assign people, right, the participants, the different roles, right? Hey, you're from the Department of Transportation, it's good. So you're in charge of mass evacuation. Why? Because you have transportation in your organization name, right? So there is a problem. I organize a national exercise, as I said before. I need, based on the scenario, I need to evacuate 200 citizens, right? So I assigned this job to the Department of Transportation. I said, during what time, you need to have 2 big buses to evacuate these 200 citizens. So he came back to me, he said, hey, we are the Department of Transportation, not Department of Buses. We don't have bus in our department, right? Understand? So if you follow in this direction to organize the disasters, you create some loopholes there. Because you would think someone would do something, but actually they cannot, or they don't want to do something, right? 2 examples is, again, the Oklahoma earthquake planning. We ask everybody, we say, hey, there might be serious earthquake happen in Oklahoma City. Have you ever do some zoning, planning, right? You need to separate the commercial area, residential areas, or for those high-rise buildings in Oklahoma City, you need to have some space because you know many people in the high-rise building, right? So when you evacuate them, you better to have the open space to accommodate these people. Have you ever do this kind of planning? They say, go ask the Department of Planning in Oklahoma City. 3 people told us this. So when we finally interview the representative, the interviewee in the Department of Planning in Oklahoma, they say, what? I don't even know I'm part of the emergency management plan. Know that? I'm in charge of the city planning. When you want to develop a community, I'm the people to go to, but I don't know I'm in charge of the emergency management, okay? Another example is I conducted a research with a professor in the University of Hawaii last year. We try to understand in Hawaii, the island, right? especially in the Honolulu, the main island, right? If the sea level rise because of the global warming, right? So how can you plan for the continuity for the emergency management? Many people say, no problem. We have a commercial harbor there. Then we have the Department of Transportation for Lake Harbor, so they will handle many things. They will help to close the gate. They will help to evacuate people. They will help to direct the ships, right? Enter to the harbor if there is a hurricane. And guess what? When we interview the interviewees in the harbor DOT, they say, oh, sorry, the harbor DOT can only control those land inside the harbor. So those roads connect to the harbor was managed by either federal government or city governments. We don't have authority to tell people to go or not to go. And those ocean area was handled by the US Coast Guard. So I even don't know how to close the gate on the ocean. Understand? So when we plan for disasters, the very important thing is we need to invite the different, in academic areas, different stakeholders, EM stakeholders to sit down and encourage them to say something. I don't know if you ever seen a very command and control style, like an exercise, organizers. You say, okay, here's a mission. Then you need to do something. No question. Okay, next one, right? This kind of emergency planning cannot help people to discuss their ideas, to point out the possible blind spots you have. Okay? Sit down, relax, talk to people, very important. Okay, good? Okay, so finally, how to plan for emergencies. I hope I can leave about 5 minutes for Q&A, right? So how? So again, I think I already touched a little bit on this. So in planning for emergencies, a very important thing is we need to realize there are some uncertainties. No matter how hard you try, you cannot predict everything. So I leave these two pictures to you. So in the year of 2004, there were two major accidents or emergencies happened in Taiwan. The first one is the airplane crash in the Taipei city, but the airplane actually crashed in the river, okay? So before the accident, everybody, every firefighters, emergency managers in Taipei city did the exercise. They practice how to, search and rescue those passengers in the airplane on the land. So no one ever think about the airplane will crash in the river, right? So in order to do this, they have to take the boat to access to the airplane. Then they realize the airplane actually have the more rigid structure for everybody's safety. So they need to come back and take the better tools to open the seats to save these citizens. And even worse, when they are doing this, they realize there are some leakings for the gasoline. Because the first time, they realize the chair is stronger than they expected. They come back with a better tool. Then the second time they start to see the gasoline leaking from the airplane, they need to come back with those tools without, combustible, engines, right? They don't want to ignite those gasoline. So again, there are so many uncertainties it would happen. So the next emergency is this one, right? Again, also happened in 2014, right? There is a color party, which means if you join the party, you listen to the rock and roll music, then people around you will throw the colorful powder on you. It's called colorful party, right? About 5 years ago is quite popular. Again, in a water park, right? No one expects that. When you distribute too much powder on the air, the particle is too close. Once it ignites, the fire would spread so fast. So he ended up with 500 teenagers get burned. Okay, so the 500 teenagers really destroyed the emergency medical system in the neighboring cities. Because in the neighboring 3 cities, we only have 287 ambulances. So you have 500 citizens get burned, need immediate care. So again, this is the uncertainty. I also published a paper as a researcher. I interview those disaster responders. Then this is a paper. If you are interested, you can download this paper. I actually talk about a lot of difficulties. So these are the 2 uncertainties. So no matter how you try, you still have the uncertainties. So a scholar talk about some ways to deal with uncertainties. I'm not going to read this, but in summary, from the researcher's perspective, to handle with uncertainties, there are some strategies you can use. First, allow yourself more time to search for possible information. Like ask people from different disciplines, different backgrounds. Ask him, what do you think? Maybe he might give you the answer, right? Maybe someone from the pencil factory might solve your problem, right? Second, remember when you are doing this kind of decisions, you need to think about the uncertain situations is necessary. No matter how you try, you still have uncertainties. So sometimes, let me think. You need to walk and think, right? So you need to be dynamic. When you do the plans, you need to keep reviewing your goals, your objectives, and sometimes you need to allow yourself to change. Okay? Then final one, I would like to say the precautionary principle. That means even you try very hard, you cannot find the scientific facts, just do it based on your professionalism. Okay, the precautionary principle means do not be hesitate if you cannot find the scientific fact. Okay, good. So I also cite this book here. It's a very interesting book chapter you can read. So good. So some takeaway, some conclusion today. Yes, I cannot walk through there. So first, you need to use broader perspectives to plan for disasters. You need to jump out of the box, listen to the different disciplines, learn from different disciplines. Then second, you need to link plan, training, and exercise. You need to remember emergency management is all talk about the cycles. Everything is about cycle, right? So I use the HSAP's picture here. You need to link your plan, training, exercise, evaluation, then modify your plan. Again, you should make your plan as a dynamic system to accommodate these uncertainties, right? So the final one is you can incorporate the research into your current planning. So there are tons of research. And of course, welcome to talk to me on the exhibition. Okay? Good, open for Q&A. Thank you. This is my keynote speech. This is my email, and this is my email, my LinkedIn account. So if you think this one is interesting, if you want to post anything, welcome to tag me on the LinkedIn. This is my keynote speech. Thank you very much.